Hello, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Joshablon, and welcome back to our series on shading. Now, today we are going to be covering 4 different techniques on how to shade, because there are lots of different ways that you can choose to shade, and lots of them are very useful in various situations. So there we go, 4 techniques for shading. Awesome. Okay, so these 4 are all a little bit different and they can be useful in their own situations. So the ones that we're going to be covering are going to be kind of hatching. Oh, that was a weird G. And then cross hatching. They're almost the same thing, just one tiny little difference between them. And yeah, so those will go by quite quickly. Then we have stippling, which is an interesting one, and then just typical shading. Some people call this method blending, and I prefer that method most of the time. Yeah, that's bothering me. Okay, so just starting with this first method, we're going to start with hatching. So hatching is basically going to just be lines, and you're using your lines to shade. So just to quickly show this on our cube, we are going to just quickly draw lines like this. And this is how you're going to shade your entire object. And this is called hatching, just using these lines. Now, if you want one plane to be darker than another, all you do is make the lines more dense. So I want this front face to be a little bit darker than the top face. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go through and add some more of those lines. It makes it a little bit denser, and in turn it makes this this face on this cube to look a little bit darker. So rather simple method and rather effective. Lots of people use this. I've seen some sketches by people such as Da Vinci. Da Vinci used to use things like hatching and cross-hatching in his sketches. Moving on to cross-hatching, it's basically the exact same with one tiny difference. And this one difference is like with hatching, all your lines are going to be going in. If it's on a face, it'll all be going in one direction. Notice that the ones in the front face always go from the top left corner to the bottom right corner, and the ones in the top face are going from this corner here to this corner here. Well, this does that and also the opposite. And so you'll also draw them going in the opposite direction. So the lines, in turn, should be perpendicular or close to. Again, if you want to make it seem a little bit darker, you just make them a bit denser. Yeah, so I like using cross-hatching in some of my sketches. It can look nice in certain situations, and it doesn't need to be super refined. So there we go. There's all of our nice cross-hatching. And yeah, they call it cross-hatching because it's just crossing your hatching in 2 different directions. And so there we go. There's kind of your difference between your hatching and your cross-hatching. Usually with cross-hatching you can get a little bit better of an effect without having a whole bunch of strips of black running through it, because if you'll notice with hatching, you're going to maybe overlap some lines, and so it might be bad if you accidentally make one big slash through it, which is personally what I see as kind of the downfall of hatching, which is why I prefer cross-hatching, because that won't be happening as much. There might be some denser areas, but in general, it'll be just a little bit cleaner. Now, stippling. This is an interesting one. I'm not too big a fan of it because I think it takes a little bit too much effort, because the other ones you saw were pretty quick. This is literally just drawing tons of tiny little dots. Now let's up brush size to make this go a bit faster. And so this is used a lot in comics. If you go and pick up an old-time comic book, typically they use stippling. And so you'll see that all of the frames are all shaded with these dots. It's also how they used to add color. If you look at old comics, all of their colors are all just done with a stippling method. And they'd use a darker shade and just dot it out to make a particular area seem darker. And so yeah, we're not going to do this one super dense because, as you can see, it's already quite time consuming, which is why I don't prefer it. It can be good if you're drawing like a smaller object or if you're adding color like in comics, but in general, if you're just doing a quick sketch, I would personally prefer the hatching method. Well, cross-hatching actually, but yeah. So there you go. There's that done. Just make it a little bit less dense on the top. And it kind of starts to give a little bit of kind of a view as if it is a little bit shaded. If you put a lot more dots in, you'd get a little bit more of a view of kind of what I'm meaning. And yeah, and then there's just kind of your normal shading. Sometimes it's called blending, and I personally like this one the best. So all you're gonna, oh, it's not. Yeah, let's do this. There we go, that's better. Okay, so basically you're just shading in your whatever part you're doing, and then you kind of layer it up and almost blur it. And I like using this method. So like, there you go. We'll quickly give a tiny layer to the top. There we go, there's our top layer. Maybe just blur a little bit just to make it seem just a little bit more even in the end. There we go. If you want to make it just look a little bit better, you could just go through and erase along the sides. Sometimes when you put shading over the sides, it looks a little bit messy. And so if you just go through and erase a little bit, it makes the shading just a little bit crisper, which sometimes is really nice, and it can make it seem a little bit less confusing. And we don't want it to be leaking into the other face of that, and yeah. So that's kind of the method of shading that I prefer for the most part. Cross-hatching, one of the things I don't like is all these little spikes that come off of it, because sometimes when you're trying to do a nice finished piece, or just a nice finished sketch, and then you have all these spikes popping off. So that's kind of what I would say is the downfall of cross-hatching. But yeah, besides that, that's kind of the only bad thing about it. And so there you go. I'm just going to start putting in some more dots as I keep talking. So in the end, those are kind of your 4 methods. So there's hatching, cross-hatching, stippling, and shading. It's just your blending method. So yeah, hatching used quite often by people just when they're doing a rough sketch. Cross-hatching, I personally like it better because that way you're not accidentally making really bold strikes of shading just across your thing, because you may not want that. If you do want it, good on you, but sometimes you just really don't want one area to be darker than the rest. And then there's stippling, which can be useful if you're making a comic. And then there's just shading, your blending method, which is what I prefer, especially for finished pieces. And so yeah, that's pretty much it. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have any other things about shading that you want to learn about, or just any tutorials you want in general for drawing, let me know and I'll consider them. And yeah, thank you everybody so much for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial.